He almost walked past her. She was 7 months pregnant, completely alone, and collapsing on a crowded sidewalk in the middle of the city. He was 3 steps away. He almost kept walking. This is the story of a man who built an empire and lost everything that actually mattered. A woman who survived without him, rebuilt without him, and carried his child without him knowing. And one moment on a sidewalk that forced them both to face the truth they had been running from. Stay with me. Because the moment he recognized her face on that concrete, everything he thought he knew about his own life collapsed right alongside her. The afternoon was ordinary in every way that mattered. Traffic moved through the city in its usual rhythm. Pedestrians filled the sidewalks with the purposeful urgency of people who had somewhere important to be. Street vendors called out from their carts. The smell of coffee drifted from an open cafe door. Everything was exactly as it should be on a Thursday afternoon, in the kind of city that never paused long enough to notice individual lives falling apart on its streets. His name was Christopher Hale. I am 41 years old, CEO of Hale Capital Group, a private investment firm he had built from a single rented office and a borrowed desk into something worth $300 million. His name appeared in financial magazines. His opinion was sought by people who ran countries. He wore a watch that cost more than most people earned in a year, and he checked it constantly, because time was the one thing even his money could not manufacture more of. He walked with his head down and his earphones in, the way he always did in public. He had perfected the art of moving through crowds without seeing them. Head down, eyes forward, mind already in the next meeting, the next call, the next decision that needed his attention. He was 3 steps past her when the cry split the air, sharp, involuntary, the sound of a body that had simply stopped listening to its owner. He kept walking for exactly 2 more strides. Then something, he would never be able to explain what, made him stop. He turned around. The woman was on the ground. A circle of strangers had already formed around her, the way crowds always do when something goes wrong in public. Phones were appearing. Someone was calling for water. A man was loosening her collar, while another checked for a pulse. The ordinary machinery of human compassion grinding into motion. Christopher stood at the edge of the gathering, looking over shoulders, and then his chest stopped moving entirely. Dark hair spread across the concrete, like ink dropped in water. A face turned slightly upward, eyes fluttering. A left hand pressed protectively against a stomach that was unmistakably, undeniably, impossibly pregnant. He knew that hand. He knew that face. He pushed through the crowd before he made a conscious decision to do so. 7 years of medical training, abandoned a decade ago for the boardroom but never truly forgotten, activated like a switch being thrown in a dark room. He knelt beside her on the concrete, checked her airway, assessed her breathing, looked at her pupils with the practiced efficiency of someone whose hands remembered what his mind had tried to leave behind. When did this start? His voice came out steady, even though nothing inside him was. Has this happened before? She opened her eyes, dark brown eyes, familiar in a way that made his throat close completely. Recognition moved across her face like the weather. First confusion, then clarity, then something that landed much harder than either of those. Fear. Not fear of the ground beneath her, or the strangers surrounding her, or whatever had caused her body to fail in the middle of a public sidewalk. Fear of him. Her lips parted. She formed a single word. Don't, she whispered. Please, do not help me. Not call someone. Not thank you. Just that one word, carrying the full weight of everything that had passed between them. Don't. He understood immediately what she was asking. She did not want him here, did not want his hands on her, or his voice in her ear, or his presence woven into whatever was happening to her body and the life growing inside it. But he was already positioning her on her side, already slipping his jacket beneath her head. The crowd was watching him now, seeing him as the competent one, the one who knew what to do. They had no idea he was the reason she was alone. When is your due date? He asked quietly. She turned her face away from him. An older woman touched his shoulder gently. You're so calm, she said, her voice warm with admiration. Are you a doctor? What? The word sat in his mouth without being spoken. I was a doctor. Before I decided that managing money was more important than anything else. Before I forgot how to come home. The sirens arrived 8 minutes later. He stayed beside her until the paramedics took over. I watched her give them her name, her address, the same address where they had once believed they were building something permanent. Watching her refuse to name an emergency contact, her jaw set with a determination he recognized from years of watching her refuse to need anything from anyone. She had always been better at surviving than he had ever deserved. The ambulance doors closed. The siren opened up in the afternoon, and Christopher stood alone on the pavement while the crowd dissolved around him, everyone returning to their ordinary lives, everyone already forgetting what they had witnessed. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Emails, messages. His CFO flagged another crisis that needed his attention before the end of the business day. For the first time in 7 years, he put the phone back without looking at it. She was pregnant, 7 months pregnant, carrying a child that the math told him was his, and she had chosen to do it without telling him, without asking him for anything, without giving him the chance to be present for a single moment of it. He stood on that sidewalk for a long time, long after the ambulance had disappeared into traffic, finally understanding what his absence had actually cost. Not money, not an opportunity, not market position or quarterly performance, everything else. Before I tell you what happened in that hospital room, and I promise you nothing could prepare you for what she said to him, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Because if this story is already doing something to your chest, the next one on this channel will completely undo you. Subscribe. I will be right here. Their marriage did not end with screaming. It did not end with thrown dishes or slammed doors, or the kind of dramatic confrontation that people imagine when they think about a relationship collapsing. There was no single explosion, no moment of volcanic rage that cleared the air and forced honesty into the room. It ended on a Tuesday evening in their kitchen, while Christopher scrolled through earnings reports on his laptop and Katherine stood at the counter in her work clothes, holding a plate of dinner she had made 3 hours earlier. The food had gone cold. She had not bothered reheating it, because some part of her already knew it did not matter. "I don't feel married anymore," she said quietly. Christopher looked up from his screen. His eyes registered her presence without truly seeing her. They were focused on the numbers behind her face, on the spreadsheet that seemed to require his attention more urgently than the woman standing 4 feet away from him. "We can schedule couples therapy," he said. "I'll have my assistant find an opening. She's efficient with the calendar." The expression that moved across Katherine's face at that moment was not anger. It was worse than anger. It was the look of someone watching the last door close. "That's exactly what I mean," she said, her voice steady in a way that frightened him more than any raised voice ever could. "Your assistant. Your solution. Your managed response. You never actually have to feel anything, Christopher. You just have to organize it." He should have closed the laptop then, should have stood up and walked to her and held her, and admitted the truth he had been running from for years, that he was terrified. That building the company had become a way to avoid the uncomfortable reality that he was dismantling his marriage one missed dinner at a time. Instead, he defended himself with achievements. He talked about the house being paid off. The investments performed well. The security he had constructed around them both. He presented these things like gifts, like financial stability, was a language of love that should have been enough. Katherine set the cold plate in the sink. She left the room without another word. He did not follow her. He would spend years identifying the exact moment things had broken beyond repair. It was 6 months before that Tuesday conversation. Katherine had called him at the office, something she almost never did, with a tremor in her voice that he should have immediately recognized as fear. She was bleeding heavily. The doctor wanted her in immediately, and she was scared in the way that people are scared when their body is telling them something they do not want to hear. He told her to take an Uber. He was in the middle of an investor call. He would come after 30 minutes, maybe 45. He would reschedule if it became absolutely necessary. The bleeding turned out to be nothing, a scare that resolved itself before he arrived. But when he walked into that hospital room 40 minutes later, carrying yellow roses from the gift shop wrapped in crinkled plastic, The fear on her face had already transformed into something else, not relief, resignation. The look of a woman who had just received the answer to a question she had not wanted to ask. She cried silently during the entire drive home. He kept his eyes on the road and said nothing because he did not know what to say. And not knowing what to say had always been easier than saying the wrong thing. They never discussed what had almost happened that day. They never discussed what was happening to them in real time either. The smaller betrayals came in a steady accumulation after that. Anniversaries rescheduled because of London calls. Dinner parties, where she smiled beside him, while he checked his phone under the table every 4 minutes. Her parents visiting from out of state, and him spending 40 minutes on a conference call in the guest bedroom, while she made apologies for his absence downstairs. She never gave him an ultimatum. That was the thing that haunted him most. Later, she never demanded that he choose, never threatened to leave. If things did not change, she simply, gradually, quietly stopped asking him to show up, stopped planning the weekends away they never took, stopped reaching for him in ways that required him to actually be present. She accepted his absence as a permanent condition, and he let her. The divorce papers were filed with surprising civility. No custody dispute, because there were no children. No argument about assets. A clean 50-50 split negotiated without raised voices or lawyers threatening each other across conference tables. It was as if they had both been waiting for a document that could finally say out loud what their behavior had been saying for years. This is finished. We tried. We failed. Christopher signed his name on the line provided. His signature looked very small on the page. He did not cry, though something inside him wanted to very badly. 3 years passed. He did not remarry, did not date seriously, threw himself deeper into the company because the company was the one thing that had never disappointed him, or more accurately, the one thing he had never allowed himself to disappoint. He worked longer hours, closed bigger deals. His name appeared in more magazines. He told himself he was fine. He was very good at telling himself things that were not true. Katherine discovered the pregnancy on a Tuesday morning. She was sitting on the bathroom floor of her one-bedroom apartment, in a building she could barely afford, staring at 2 pink lines that were not asking for her opinion about their timing or their implications. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was doing something that did not have a medical name, and the very first thought that moved through her mind, before joy or terror or any rational calculation, was a single sentence she could not argue herself out of. I cannot tell him, not yet, maybe not ever, not until she understood what this meant for the life she had been carefully rebuilding without him. She went to every appointment alone. She sat in waiting rooms, surrounded by couples holding hands. Women accompanied by their mothers and sisters and best friends, all of them radiating the kind of shared anticipation that made her feel her solitude more acutely than anything else could. She brought a notebook. She researched every question obsessively at 3 a.m, when sleep felt impossible, and her mind would not stop cycling through everything she was facing without a single person beside her. The first ultrasound was the hardest day. She heard the heartbeat, that galloping, impossible sound of a life developing inside her, and there was no one to turn to, no hand to grip, no face to look at with the expression that said, "Do you hear that? Do you understand what we have made?" She took the pictures home alone and stared at them until the image blurred. She drafted the message to Christopher 17 times. "I'm pregnant. We're having a baby. You're going to be a father." She deleted every version because she knew exactly what would happen if she sent it. She knew him better than he had ever known himself. He would come to appointments out of obligation, the way he had shown up to everything in their marriage, out of obligation and schedule management and the need to appear responsible. He would create a budget and assign tasks, and treat their daughter like a deliverable on a project timeline. And she could not watch him resent a child for existing at an inconvenient moment. She could not do that to herself, and she absolutely could not do it to her daughter. The financial reality arrived the way it always does, gradually and then all at once. Her apartment consumed nearly half her salary. Medical bills arrived in envelopes that made her stomach drop. She chose between prenatal vitamins and replacing her winter coat, and did not hesitate for a single second before choosing the vitamins. She wore the old coat through the cold months, the one with the broken zipper she had been meaning to replace for 2 years, and told herself it was temporary. She was very good at telling herself things that were difficult, but necessary. She set up a small nursery in the corner of her bedroom, a dresser from a second-hand store, boxes of baby items stacked neatly against the wall, most of them still sealed with tape, because opening them made everything feel too real and too fragile simultaneously. She folded tiny onesies with a care that felt disproportionate to their size, soft mittens, a hat from a discount store that turned out to be softer than she expected. Each small garment represented a future she was building entirely alone. She had driven past their old house once, just once, on a day when hormones and exhaustion had conspired to make her unkind to herself. She sat in her car outside the wrought iron gates and looked at the house where they had believed in forever, and she thought about everything it had cost her to love a man who was always somewhere else, even when he was standing right beside her. Then she drove home, made herself dinner, went to sleep, because that was what she did now. She kept going. If you know someone who has ever had to be strong when they had absolutely no business being strong, send them this video right now. Do not wait until the end. Just pause and send it. They will understand immediately why you did, and then come back. Because what happens in that hospital room between Christopher and Katherine is the part of this story I have been building toward from the very first sentence. She did not want him there. That was the first thing she said when he appeared in the doorway of her hospital room, still wearing the jacket he had placed beneath her head on the sidewalk, looking like a man who had just been shown evidence of his own worst decisions. "You don't have to stay," Katherine said, her voice controlled and careful. "The nurses confirmed you're still listed as my emergency contact. I never updated it. That's my mistake, not an invitation." Christopher moved to the chair beside her bed. He did not sit. He stood with his hands at his sides, uncertain what to do with himself in a space where he had not been invited. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "Embarrassed. Everything is stable. You can go." "Katherine, 7 months," she said, cutting him off. Her hand moved to her belly with an instinct that had nothing to do with him. "If that's what you're calculating, the math works. It's yours. I'm not going to make this complicated by pretending otherwise." The words landed on him like a verdict. He sat down. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice came out smaller than he intended, more broken than he had heard himself sound in years. Katherine turned to look at him directly. Her eyes held the particular clarity of someone who had spent months alone with the truth and had therefore had considerable time to understand it completely. "Because I know you," she said simply. "I have always known you, Christopher, better than you know yourself. You would have come to appointments because it was the responsible thing to do. You would have created a budget. You would have delegated the emotional work to someone efficient while you managed the logistics. And our daughter would have grown up watching her father treat her existence as an obligation he was admirably meeting." "You don't know what I would have done," he said. "You didn't give me the chance." "Yes, I do," she interrupted quietly. "Because I watched you for 6 years. Every single time there was a choice, you made it. The investor called when I was bleeding and frightened and needed you to come. The anniversary you rescheduled twice and then forgot entirely. My parents are visiting, and you are spending 40 minutes on a work call while I made excuses for you downstairs." His throat felt like it was closing. "I noticed," he said. "No," Katherine replied. "You noticed when I stopped asking you to notice. There's a difference. By the time you noticed, I had already grieved the marriage and came out the other side. I had already accepted that I was not enough to bring you home." The monitors beside her tracked 2 heartbeats, hers, steady and controlled, their daughter's, faster. That galloping sound he had heard described but never imagined would mean something this specific and this devastating to him personally. "I want to be involved," Christopher said. "I want to know her. I want to be part of this." Katherine's laugh was quiet and entirely empty of humor. "Of course you do," she said. "Now, when it's real and visible and impossible to schedule around. But I've learned something these past 3 years that I should have understood much sooner." She looked at him steadily. I deserve someone who chooses to show up when showing up is inconvenient. Who comes home because home is where he wants to be, not because it's the next item on a responsible man's checklist. Christopher stood and walked to the window. The city spread out below him, indifferent and illuminated, entirely unconcerned with the reconstruction happening in this small hospital room. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He took it out, looked at the screen, saw the notifications stacking up like unpaid debts, and turned it off completely. It was a small gesture. He knew that, meaningless against the weight of everything he had missed, and everything she had carried without him. But in that moment, silencing the constant noise of his ambitions was the first honest thing he had done in longer than he wanted to calculate. Katherine watched him do it. She did not say anything, but she did not look away either. He came to the next appointment without being asked. Katherine walked out of the obstetrics office and stopped mid-stride when she saw him sitting in the waiting room, hands folded in his lap like a man presenting himself for judgment. Around him, couples sat together with the comfortable intimacy of people building lives in tandem. He sat alone, occupying his chair with the careful stillness of someone who understood he had not yet earned the right to take up more space than that. "You came," she said. "Yes," Christopher replied. She studied him for a moment, looking for the performance, the managed response, the strategic display of reformed behavior designed to achieve a specific outcome. She did not find it. She turned and walked toward the ultrasound room, and he followed. On the screen, their daughter took shape in gradients of gray and white. A profile, a thumb moving toward a mouth already developing preferences, a heartbeat steady and strong and entirely indifferent to the complicated adults watching her from outside. Christopher felt something crack open in his chest that he had not known was sealed. This was not a problem, not a crisis, not a situation requiring management and delegation and strategic response. This was a person, his daughter, and she had been existing in the world for 7 months while he perfected quarterly earnings reports. He started small, because small was all he had earned the right to attempt. He assembled the crib on a Saturday morning, while Katherine watched from the living room doorway with an expression cycling between gratitude and deep suspicion. When the corners did not align on his first attempt, he did not check his phone or express frustration or blame the instructions. He simply adjusted. I tried again. The patience surprised even him. It took 3 hours for something that should have taken 1, and he did not complain once. "It's sturdy," he said, testing each rail carefully. Katherine nodded from across the room. He came to every appointment after that. He researched car seats with the same intensity he had once applied to acquisition targets, comparing safety ratings across 16 models before selecting the correct one. He showed up on weekday evenings with food he had learned to cook from YouTube tutorials, leaving it at her door without expectation of being invited in. His team at the company began noticing the changes. "You're blocking your calendar," his CFO observed during a board meeting, his concern visible and genuine. "Taking early days, leaving before 6. Is there something we should know?" Christopher looked around the conference table, at the faces of people who had built careers around his relentless availability. "My priorities have shifted," he said simply. "We'll restructure my role to reflect that." There were raised eyebrows. There was quiet skepticism from every corner of the room. He did not explain further. The real test came on a quiet evening when he reached toward her shoulder in her kitchen. Instinctively, the way he used to in another life. She flinched. A small involuntary movement that told him everything about the distance his absence had created. He withdrew his hand immediately, without comment, without making her feel guilty for a response she could not control and had not chosen. "I'm sorry," Katherine whispered. "Don't be," Christopher said. "You have every reason not to trust this yet. I understand that trust isn't given. It's rebuilt slowly in small moments, and I have a very long way to go." That night he stayed and watched television beside her in the particular silence of two people who were learning each other again from the beginning. He did not try to hold her hand, did not attempt to bridge the physical distance between them. He simply stayed and came back the next evening, and the one after that. Consistency, he was discovering, was the only language she had any reason left to believe. "We are almost at the moment this whole story has been moving toward." The night she called him at 3:47 in the morning. But before I take you there, if you are not subscribed to this channel yet, do it right now. Because after this story ends, I am releasing another one that begins exactly where this one leaves off. You do not want to miss it. Subscribe, then keep watching. We are almost there. It started at 3:47 in the morning. Katherine woke with her hand pressed against her belly, feeling the muscles contract beneath her palm in a way that was different from anything she had experienced before. Stronger, more purposeful. Her body began the work it had been preparing for over 9 months. She timed the contractions on her phone with hands that were not entirely steady. 6 minutes apart, then 5, then 4. She called Christopher at 4:15 a.m. He answered before the second ring. "I think it's happening," she said, and her voice came out smaller and more frightened than she had intended. She had planned to be calm about this. I had rehearsed being calm about this many times. "I'm leaving right now," he said. "Stay on the phone." She heard him moving through his apartment. Keys, jacket, the sound of someone galvanized by something more important than anything else on his schedule. He was at her door in 11 minutes, slightly breathless, wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, hair uncombed, looking more present and more real than she had seen him in years. He gathered her hospital bag, helped her into her coat, guided her to the car with his hand steady on her lower back, and drove through empty streets with the careful attention of a man who understood exactly what he was carrying. At the hospital, everything accelerated. Nurses, questions, and Vierte. The labor and delivery room with its particular smell of antiseptic and enormous consequence. And through all of it, Christopher stayed beside her, his hand available whenever she reached for it, his voice steady when the contractions built into something that consumed her entire body. "I'm right here," he said, every time she looked at him. "I'm not going anywhere." The pain came in waves that grew beyond anything she had prepared herself for. She gripped his hand hard enough to feel his bones, and he did not flinch. His watch, the expensive one she had given him for their 3rd anniversary, dug into her palm, and she focused on that sharp edge as something real and present in a moment when reality felt very far away. At some point during the long hours of labor, she watched him remove the watch. He did it quietly, with his free hand, and set it on the nightstand without looking at it again. The watch that cost more than 3 months of her current rent, sitting forgotten on a hospital nightstand beside medical equipment and plastic cups of ice chips. He never picked it up again. She noticed. Their daughter arrived at 6:43 in the morning. One final push, and then a release, and then a sound so small it was almost swallowed by the noise of the room before it grew stronger and more insistent and more furious. The cry of a person who had opinions about the world from her very first moment in it. She was placed on Katherine's chest, warm and perfect and entirely overwhelming. Christopher made a sound that she had never heard from him before. Not words, not the composed, measured language of a man who always knew what to say in difficult rooms. Something rawer than that. Something that came from a place beneath strategy and composure, and the 7 years of emotional distance he had constructed around himself. He reached out and touched their daughter's face with a reverence that required no performance, because there was no one left to perform for. "She's here," he said, his voice completely undone. "She's actually here." Katherine watched him at that moment, not with forgiveness. That would come later in smaller, quieter moments, but with recognition. With the understanding that some transformations do not happen in boardrooms or therapy sessions or carefully constructed conversations. They happen at 6:43 in the morning when a person you have lost touches the face of someone you both created and becomes, finally and irreversibly, someone new he had chosen in the only moment that could not be scheduled or delegated or managed. He had chosen to be exactly where he was. I need you to stop for just 1 second. If that moment, him setting down that watch and never picking it up again, hit you somewhere you were not expecting, tell me about it in the comments. Tell me what detail in this story broke you open the most. Was it the watch? Was it the 3:47 phone call? Was it the word she whispered on the sidewalk? Tell me. And share this video right now, because someone in your life needs this story today, and they do not know it yet. One more part. Stay with me. 3 months later, On a Thursday afternoon, they walked past the sidewalk together. The concrete was unmarked, indistinguishable from every other section of pavement in the city. The crowd that had gathered was long dissolved. The strangers who had watched were somewhere else now, living their ordinary lives, having forgotten entirely that they had witnessed anything of consequence. But Christopher remembered every second of it. Their daughter slept in the stroller, unaware that this particular block of pavement had any significance. Katherine walked beside him, and he maintained the careful, respectful distance he had learned not to close without invitation. "This is where it happened," she said quietly. "Yes," he replied. They stopped walking. Around them the city continued its motion, indifferent and relentless, entirely unconcerned with the quiet, significant things happening on its streets. "I'm terrified," Katherine said, her voice dropping to something almost private. He waited, because he had learned that her fear deserved space rather than immediate reassurance. "Of what?" he asked. "Of believing this is real," she said. "Of trusting this version of you. Of waking up one day and finding out that you've decided the company matters more again. That I wasn't enough to keep you here." She paused. "I've been wrong about you before. I was wrong about you for 6 years. Christopher turned to face her. He did not reach for her, did not attempt to close the physical distance between them. He had learned that proximity without trust was not comfort. It was pressure. "I can't promise I'll never fail you again," he said honestly. "I can't erase the months I missed or the years I chose badly. I can't make the hospital trip you made alone something that didn't happen. I can't give you back the ultrasound you attended without anyone to turn to." She flinched slightly at that. "But I can promise you this," he continued. "Every day, in every decision, I will choose you and her first. Not because I've worked out the formula for being a better man, but because I finally understand what I was actually building all those years when I thought I was building a company." "What were you building?" she asked. "Distance," he said simply. "I was building distance between myself and everything that actually mattered. And I was very successful at it." Katherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated contact in all the weeks since the hospital. The first gesture of trust offered freely, rather than cautiously permitted. Christopher felt it like the first warm day after a winter that has gone on too long. Like something his body had forgotten was possible. "I'm going to be afraid," she said quietly. "I'm going to be distant sometimes, and difficult sometimes. And I'm going to test you in ways that probably aren't fair." "I know," Christopher said. "And you'll stay anyway?" "Every single time," he said. "Without exception, without condition, without keeping score." She did not say she believed him, but she did not let go of his hand either. They stood on that unremarkable stretch of pavement, their daughter sleeping between them in her stroller, while the city moved around them without pausing, without noticing, without caring about the small, enormous thing happening in its midst. He had almost kept walking that afternoon, 3 months ago. 3 more steps, and he would have missed everything. He would have gone about his day without knowing his life was already being rewritten. Would have returned to his office and his spreadsheets and his managed successful emptiness without ever understanding what it had cost him. But he had stopped. He had turned around. And that single decision, that one moment of pausing when every habit he had built told him to keep moving forward, had changed the entire direction of everything. Some people spend their whole lives building things that don't matter and missing things that do. The difference between those two kinds of men isn't talent or intelligence or even intention. It's the willingness to stop, to turn around, to choose differently, even when choosing differently is the hardest thing you have ever done. Christopher Hale almost walked past the moment that saved his life. He didn't, and that made all the difference. If this story moved you, you already know why. Because somewhere in Katherine's silence, or Christopher's absence, or that single word she whispered on the sidewalk, you recognized something true. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to this channel because the next story coming will shake you even deeper. And comment below and tell me honestly, would you have given him another chance? Or was Katherine right to protect her heart? I will see you in the next story.